Hello, hope you're all well. So what we're just going to do today is a recap on the difference of two squares. Now, remember last week I was talking about different types of factorising that we have. So we have common factor, difference of two squares, and trinomial. This week we're going to be going over difference of two squares. Now, the first thing that's really important about difference of two squares is knowing the conditions where it exists. So the first condition is the first and last terms are square terms, okay? So they must be square terms. So for example, 4x squared is a square term because it's 2 squared and it's x squared. Okay, so we'll be looking to have the first and last terms being square terms, and then there's a takeaway sign in between the first and last terms. Next thing we want to do is look at the process. The first thing is you're always wanting to look for a common factor no matter what you do. Whenever you factorise, you always look for a common factor first because you have three different types of factorising.
So look at the example we have with x squared minus y
but
squared.
You can have combinations
do they apply
of those
to the
three,
conditions
so
above? Well, yes, we've got two
differences
square terms. Our first
and you can have
term is x squared and squared. A last term
so in this case, we always want to make sure that we are looking for that common factor first.
Okay, so what's the process? The first thing you're going to do is have two brackets. Okay, so that's two sets of brackets for this example. Okay, now for any difference in two squares, that's going to be the case. We are going to square root first term and put it in the first position. Okay, so I'll just put a 2 here so you can see that that's where this is matching up. We're going to do the same with the last term as well. So we're going to square root that last term and then put it in the last position in the bracket. So the y is coming in here. This is going to be 3, y and y. And the final thing to do is 1 plus sign, 1 minus sign. Now the order doesn't actually matter. It could be plus here, minus there. Could be this way, it doesn't really matter. You're going to end up with the same thing when you expand those brackets, which obviously would go back to x squared minus y squared. So it's a nice and easy process that we're going to be doing. So we're going to do some examples. I've got 6 just now to do. The first one we're going to look at is 4 minus b squared. So let's go back to the process. The process first of all says look for a common factor. It's clear in this example that there isn't a common factor, so now I can just do the difference of two squares if we have the conditions of difference for two squares. So is the first term squared? Yes, it is, because 4 is made up of 2 squared. Is b squared a square term? Obviously. And there's a minus, so we can do d2s here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is open those two sets of brackets. We're going to square root first term goes in first position. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of b squared is b. And our last thing is to have 1 plus and 1 minus. There we are, completed. There's nothing more that we can do with that example. 2. I've got 2x squared minus 9. So what we're going to do is we're going to check for a common factor. In this case, there is no common factor. So now we need to see if we can actually use difference of two squares here. So is 2x squared a square term? It is not, because 2 is not a square number. So for this reason, we cannot use difference of two squares. Okay, so that's as 2 is not a square number. So the next example we're going to look at then is 25x squared minus 9. Now, looking for a common factor. There is none. So what I want to do now is this got two square terms? 25 is square, x squared is square, and 9 is square. So yes, we can do difference of two squares here. We're going to square root first term, put in first position. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of x squared is x. So 5x in first position. Square root of 9 is 3. 1 plus, 1 minus. Doesn't matter the order of the symbols. I tend to do plus first. That's just the way I normally do it. So don't worry if it's the other way around. Like I said earlier, that is not a problem. 4 is going to be 81 x squared plus 25 w squared. Okay, we're going to look at, does this satisfy the requirements for difference of two squares? Okay, first of all, no common factor. We can ignore that. 81 is a square term, that's 9 squared. X squared is a square term, that's fine. 25 is a square term, that's 5 squared, and w squared is a square term. However, we have a plus. If there is a plus, there is certainly not a difference of two squares. So that is not a difference of two squares because of the plus sign. Okay. The next example we're going to do is this one. It is 27x squared minus 12y squared. And what we need to look for, first of all, is a common factor. In this case, there is a common factor. That common factor is 3. So we're taking 3 out. What's going inside? Okay, 3 times what is 27? That's 9x squared. 3 times what is 12? 4. Y squared. And there's a minus. Okay. So no matter what, that 3 is going to continue for the rest of the example. But we need to see whether the bracket is factorisable. So can we factorise this bracket? Well, let's have a look at it in more detail. 9 square. 4 is a square term. X squared and y squared are square terms. And there's a minus sign. We can do difference of two squares in the bracket. Okay, if you square root to the power of 4 term, what happens is you have the square root of x to the power of 4. Now, the square root in the first square term cancels, which would leave you with x to the power of 2. So yes, in this case, it is a square term. So what happens is you get your square rooted term in the first position, so that's x squared. You square root the 1, and you've got a plus and minus. Have we finished this question? Okay. Now, if we look here at this x squared minus 1, we have another difference of two squares. So in actual fact, this case is going to have 3 brackets. We're going to have the first bracket, which remains unchanged because of that plus sign. We're going to square root the first term. We're going to square root the last term. We're going to have 1 plus, 1 minus. And that is your final answer.